Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hope you're having an amazing day. While the RTX 5090 is the card that many of us want to buy, it is also going to be very expensive. Whether it ends up being $1,700 US, $2,000 US, $2,300 US, or somewhere in between, ultimately this is a card that many of us simply do not want to cough up for. It's just ridiculous, and therefore, of course, GPUs such as the 5080, the 5070, and even lower class GPUs are going to be the cards that I think are going to be much more popular, as we've seen historically before. Therefore, I found the specifications of the RTX 5070 Ti, which have recently popped up online, particularly of interest. Now, I want to give credit to videocards.com for putting out this article, but I also want to give a special shout out to Coppertight7Kimmy, who actually provided them the information according to their article. They are a pervasive leaker for all things Nvidia, so typically speaking, their information is pretty accurate. I will, however, give the massive asterisk here that Nvidia are not exactly shy about changing specifications up until the very last minute, and with this kind of stuff, they could easily change things like the TDP of the GPU or something else. Now, I'm going to give my 2 pennies of the specifications in just a moment, but let's just go over the specs really briefly. Unfortunately, the memory configuration is not known. Now, we can guess it's either going to be 12 or 16 gigabytes of memory. Now, we can guess this because the 5080, at least unless something's changed, is 16 gigabytes of memory, GDDR7, don't you know, and the 5070 is going to be 12 gigabytes of memory. So that's on a 256-bit and 192-bit bus, respectively. Now, those specifications, to my knowledge, are correct for the 5080 as well. I've also heard 84SM. So if we compare that to the 5070 Ti, you'll see that the 5070 Ti is 70SM, whereas 84SM, again, for the 5080. And then if we compare the TDP, we're looking at 400 watts versus 300 watts. So, of course, these figures, again, can change quite a lot, and there isn't a huge shave down, to be honest with you, with the SM number versus the 5080 and the 5070 Ti. I'm just going to refer to it as the Ti probably for most of this video. But, obviously, once again, they could change the bus of the memory, they could shave that down. There could also be the same bus and memory configuration in terms of the quantity and the bus width, but they could perhaps run slower memory. So obviously, in theory anyway, because there's fewer SMs, in theory, you wouldn't need so much memory bandwidth, but that would also depend on things like the cache configuration of the GPU. Unfortunately, we do not know 100% what the cache configuration is of these GPUs right now, and just to be clear here, I mean last level cache or L2 or what have you. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all this performs. But, so what I want to do just for a second, guys, is to make a little bit of a comparison versus the various cards. So if we were to pick, just for a second, on the RTX 5090, we're looking at 170 SM. Now, the full configuration of the GB202 is 192 SM. As far as I understand, those specifications are correct, but again, they can change at any moment. Meanwhile, once again, 84 SM for the 5080, and once again, we're looking at 70 SM for the 5070 Ti. So if we were to look at this in terms of the actual number of SM from one generation to another, assuming these specifications are correct, the RTX 5090, roughly speaking, has 33% more SM or CUDA cores. Meanwhile, the 5080, roughly speaking, over the RTX 4080 has around a 10% increase. I'm rounding up and down the figures here just for everyone's sanity. But if we were to look at the relative numbers, again, we can use videocards.com as they've made a nice little comparison table here. And you were to look at the number of SM between the 5090 and the 5080, the drop-off is absolutely huge. Well, it's not even a drop-off at this point, it's essentially a cliff. And obviously you've got the 5070 Ti where it's absolutely just like, yeah, you're going into a crater, you're not even hitting, it's like the equivalent of going from Mount Everest, and then you end up in like a trench. It's basically you're going from Mount Everest and then you end up at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Now, I did get some performance figures, however, these are pretty old. And basically speaking, I was told that the 5090 in raster is going to be up to 50% faster. Meanwhile, the 4080 Super versus the 5080 is going to be around 30%. And the 4070 Super to 5070 is going to be around 26. However, once again, those performance figures are very old, and so it's a very good chance that they are based on either speculative numbers, in other words, simulations, and more likely those are numbers that are from basically specifications that have since changed. And Nvidia, of course, have changed these specifications so many times at this point. If you recall, even the 5090 has undergone multiple design changes. Like, not only has the number of SM changed, but the memory configuration has changed, like, I think 3 times at this point. Not just the actual speed of the memory, but I think initially it was a 512-bit. Then it went to, what was it? Was it 448? Yeah, it was 448, wasn't it? Yeah, it was 448. And went back up to 512-bit again. So again, these numbers at this far out, they're a little bit too, they're a bit too speculative. I imagine, however, because AIBs are starting to essentially get cards for testing and early engineering samples, they're basically, as we've discussed before, basically we should start to know something pretty soon regarding, at the very least, some of the models. So because the 5090 is going to release in January, which of course, again, is before all of the other cards, speculatively, you would imagine that would be the card that you see the leak for first. And if we can have some type of anchor, we can probably start to make a much better prediction as to the rest of the performance. So in other words, we can start to say, well, if it's like X faster with Y specifications, then we can start to make a prediction based on a lot of things. It's going to be very interesting, though, because while SM count is not be-all and end-all, obviously there are other elements to a performance of a GPU. Just for example, the 5090 could end up with a slower clock frequency than the 5080 or the 5070 class cards. Just as a pure example, it could end up with like 2900 megahertz versus 31 or 3200 or 3300. I'm just giving examples here. This is not a leak. But generally speaking, there is not such a big gulf in clock frequency for Nvidia cards, at least if you were to look historically on the 20 and 30 and 40 series cards. Like, there might be a small difference, but it's certainly not that big to explain this, if it's going to be making up like basically 50% of SMs. So it's going to be very interesting, is basically what I'm saying, because beforehand, many of the leaks were basically saying that the 5080 is going to be roughly on par with the with the 4090. I'm going to wait and see whether that's true or not. It's going to be very interesting if it is. I will be very curious to see the prices of these products, is basically what it comes down to. And I'm assuming that the 5080 Ti, when eventually it launches, I'm assuming that that thing will probably have a core based on the GB202 core and probably have, a pretty good amount of SM. So let me know your thoughts on this one, guys. Like, the 5090 is definitely a very cool looking card if you can afford it. And I'm not writing off the 5080. Like, I don't think it's going to be a terrible product or anything like that. I just really wish it had some more SMs. But again, because we don't know the performance figures, and we don't know things like how it scales and memory bandwidth, whether there's any limitations there and so on and so on, it becomes very difficult to 100% know. Plus, also, the prices and marketing for this stuff is going to be a really big factor. My guess, and again, I'm guessing this is not a leak, Nvidia are really going to be pushing the 5090, not just for gaming, but things like AI, content creation, that type of thing, because look at the amount of VRAM this thing has. Okay, a lot of games can certainly go over 16 gigabytes, especially if you're pushing like 4K, ray tracing, all the texture quality up to the highest. But 24 gigabytes is good for most games, like even at 4K. I can't think of any card that's pushed my 4090 above 24, made it stutter. Maybe I'm missing a game, so if I am, do correct me in the comments below if you can think of a game that really pushes VRAM beyond like 24 gigabytes. I can't think of one. Maybe there's been one, but I can't think of it offhand. So if I'm wrong, do correct me in the comments below. So it's going to be interesting to see. But obviously, let's just say these things are going to be bloody expensive. The one good thing, however, of course, as we all know, RDNA 4 is going to be releasing at roughly the same time schedule, and it seems Battle Mage is definitely on track. And so one good thing about that is hopefully it will keep Nvidia's prices honest, and ultimately, if RDNA 4 can hit, you know, the targets, because allegedly it's much better at ray tracing, I'll, you know, wait and see benchmarks, frankly, but if it does actually hit the benchmark targets, you know, sorry, the performance targets that have been rumored for ray tracing, and it's a good price, I think it's going to be quite popular with gamers. Again, it's going to be roughly on par with like a 7900 XT or something like that, so it's going to be a very interesting card. With that said, guys, take care of yourselves, have an amazing day, bye for now.